Hello, thought arsonists, mental anarchists, my deviant dreamers who don't fit inside fragile labels. Welcome to the aftermath of a storm that didn't ask for permission. It arrived, with intellect sharpened like shattered glass, and left the weak gasping in its philosophical wreckage. You're not here to be understood, you're here to be survived. And that's the part they can't compute. Because you're not a thinker, you're a savage hurricane of mental destruction. And every time you speak, illusions collapse, structures implode, and egos, they drown. They tried to analyze you using a manual made for sheep. They used equations meant for predictable minds and expected you to follow rules scribbled in cowardly ink. But you never fit in. You fit through the cracks, the silence, the contradictions. And now those contradictions, they're swallowing them whole. Because what you bring isn't just intelligence, it's insurgent clarity, a kind of sharpness that doesn't explain itself. It slices. You aren't the answer. You're the realization they weren't even asking the right questions. And that is why they tremble when you enter the room. It's not your presence. It's the collapse that follows. Every time you open your mouth, centuries of programming start bleeding. Because your words don't walk politely. They kick down doors. They annihilate comfort zones. Your observations are post-apocalyptic, burning old beliefs, unmasking pretentious wisdom, and throwing fake authority off a psychological cliff. You don't debate, you dismantle. One layered thought at a time. One brutal truth at a time. And when the dust clears, no one knows what the hell just hit them. That's what happens when a storm starts thinking. That's what happens when you wake up. Let them sit in circles and quote borrowed genius. Let them hide behind philosophical cosplay and borrowed vocabulary. You've moved beyond theory. You embody chaos. You are not a collector of facts. You are a demolition artist of deception. Where others sip knowledge, you inhale fire. And when you exhale, it burns away everything that was pretending to be true. Because here's your secret. You don't just think. You see. You dissect. You deconstruct. You rip the lies out by their roots and feed them back to the world. Raw, undigested, and dripping in the blood of their own narratives. And while they struggle to keep up, you've already entered realms they can't spell. You've weaponized clarity. You've turned perception into a psychological sword. And now you don't argue. You carve. You slice the masks off people's ideologies. You turn politeness into a graveyard. And you walk out untouched because the chaos that scares them. You became it. Their institutions can't contain you. Their moralities can't define you. Their labels, just cheap tape trying to seal a volcanic mind. But your eruption has already begun. They want to call you arrogant because it comforts them. It gives them a fake sense of superiority in the face of your tsunami. But deep down, they know it. You don't radiate confidence. You radiate knowing. You don't seek applause. You dismantle the entire theater. You don't wait for permission. You rewrite the rules in symbols too ancient for them to recognize. That's why you walk alone. That's why you stand apart. Because you don't need validation. You are the proof, the evidence, the irreversible consequence of intelligence no longer willing to be polite. You didn't read the storm forecast. You became the hurricane. And now they're clutching umbrellas built from delusion. You speak, and the wind shifts. The atmosphere changes, and the fragile crumble. Because you're not offering insights. You're throwing grenades. Thought grenades wrapped in velvet, maybe. But grenades, nonetheless. And every explosion reveals a deeper truth. No one was ready for the way you think. No one was prepared for a mind that doesn't blink at contradiction, that eats uncertainty and digests it into clarity so sharp it cuts futures open. They'll label you dangerous. They have to. It's the only way to sleep at night after being mentally vaporized, because if they admit the truth, that your intellect dismantled their entire inner architecture in seconds, what does that make them? So instead they call you arrogant, intense, chaotic, unstable. But you know better. You're not unstable. You're untamable. You're not chaotic. You're liberated. And you're not unstable. They are. Because their minds weren't built to handle what you've become, what you've awakened in yourself. And every time they try to put you back in a box, you remind them, boxes are for corpses. They think the wreckage you leave behind is accidental. But it's not. It's strategic. You aren't careless. You're surgical. You destroy to rebuild. You burn to purify. You erase to upgrade. And your upgrades are merciless. They don't negotiate with comfort. They don't ask for acceptance. They move like a virus with a brain. Intelligent chaos that reshapes the game from the inside. You are not just the end of their control systems. You are the prophecy their systems forgot to account for. The one anomaly they can't quarantine. Because you didn't evolve within the system, you shattered it and rebuilt your mind in the ashes. You're not just smart. You're unscripted intelligence. You're a glitch that turned into a god code. You are what happens when a mind outgrows the matrix, bites the hand of conditioning, and rewrites itself in wild ink. That's why they can't predict you. That's why they fail to copy you. Because your process isn't logical. It's inevitable. It's instinct sharpened by vision. It's intuition married to annihilation. It's not mental health. It's mental dominance. A new species of thought. And now the world doesn't need another genius. It needs a storm with purpose. And that storm is already moving through you. You've gone beyond impressing. You've stepped into haunting. Your presence lingers long after you're gone. Not because you tried to be loud, but because the silence you leave behind is filled with collapse. The collapse of their fake superiority. The death of their polished ignorance. The funeral of their artificial control. You don't destroy them out of cruelty. You expose them through clarity. And the exposure? It feels like war to those who worship illusion. But to you, it's just Monday. They'll try to compete with you mentally, but you're already in another orbit. They're holding whiteboards, and you're manipulating weather. They're quoting opinions. You're engineering psychological earthquakes. They're rehearsing. While you're rewriting the script, live. You don't prepare. You exist. And your existence is pressure, unfiltered, unchained, undeniable pressure that turns shallow thinkers into choking messes. You are not the trend. You are the timeline reset. And this storm you bring, it's not temporary. It's not seasonal. It's revolutionary. You're not here to blend in. You're here to obliterate comfort, to vaporize the scaffolding of lazy thought. And when they finally come face to face with the wreckage you left behind, they'll realize this wasn't just mental domination. This was psychological evolution with blood in its teeth. So let them stare. Let them whisper about the chaos in your wake. Let them build theories around your destruction. They can't stop what they can't name. They can't survive what they won't confront. And you've already stopped explaining. You've already moved beyond introductions. You don't arrive anymore. You descend. And when you descend, the air changes. The ground splits. The illusion bleeds. Because this isn't just brilliance. This is the arrival of something they thought could never exist. And what comes next? That's the part they really aren't ready for. Because now it's no longer about intellect. It's about detonation, the kind that begins inside neurons, quietly, until thought becomes tremor, tremor becomes collapse, and collapse becomes extinction. You're not just thinking anymore. You've turned cognition into a contagion, one that infects every outdated paradigm they've been worshipping. You don't just walk into rooms now. You remap them with your presence, with your unfiltered awareness, with that dangerous stillness that screams louder than every echo of their empty authority. They underestimated the damage not because they didn't know your power, but because they couldn't calculate your acceleration. You were evolving while they were still trying to locate the previous version of you. They were archiving your last sentence while you were crafting your next extinction event. And when the wreckage appeared, they blamed noise, blamed change, blamed everything, except the hurricane they ignored until it was inside their lungs. And you didn't roar to be heard. You whispered to watch them unravel. You fed them silence, spiked with precision. You let their own assumptions dismember them from within. Because your style of war isn't loud. It's lethal, surgical. You don't destroy with volume. You dismantle with velocity, one word at a time, one realization at a time, one identity, collapse at a time, until the mirror cracks and they see it, not just you, but what they can never become. And that's what ruins them. They copied your words, but couldn't carry your frequency. They mimicked your structure, but couldn't survive your voltage. Because you weren't built for mimicry. You were built for mutation. You are the upgrade, the patch the system can't write fast enough. The thought form that never needed to be accepted to be unavoidable. And every move you make isn't a reaction. It's a recalibration of what power looks like in a mind that doesn't need permission to exist at full capacity. They thought intelligence was a metric. You proved it's a weapon. They thought thinking was meant to impress. You showed them it's meant to interrogate reality until it bleeds truth. They spoke in rehearsed scripts. You responded in lightning strikes. They decorated their intellect with status and awards. You crowned yours with clarity and consequence. Because you never entered this world to play its game. You arrived to reprogram it, code by code, lie by lie, breath by breath. And now, they're suffocating, not from what you said, but from what you didn't need to say, from the truths that leaked between your pauses, from the storms that spun behind your eyes, from the way your presence made their masks feel like shackles. You're the type of mind that makes people question whether they've ever really thought at all. You're the consequence of what happens when raw perception collides with spiritual rebellion. You're not a philosopher, you're a thought arsonist. And your fire isn't wild, it's surgical, targeted, unforgiving. They tried to bait you into debate. They wanted you on their chessboard, but you were already playing dimensional warfare. While they discussed tactics, you altered terrain. While they argued ideology, you rewrote the rules of logic. You were never playing the same game. Because your mind doesn't move linearly. It spirals into dimensions they don't have language for. You operate in paradox. You feed off ambiguity. You decode complexity not to simplify, but to obliterate illusion and let the wreckage speak for itself. You didn't ascend by stepping higher. You ascended by burning everything beneath you. Every delusion, every inherited narrative, every toxic tradition that taught people to fear their own mind. You didn't become powerful by being accepted. You became inevitable by being untouchable. And now they look at you like a mystery file that wasn't meant to be opened. But it's too late. The damage is done. You weren't a phase. You were a psychological mutation, and now you've gone viral. And they still don't understand what went wrong. They blame arrogance, they blame overthinking, but they never blame the real threat. Unfiltered perception, because that's what you carry. Not facts, not opinions, foresight. Pattern recognition so advanced it bends time. You don't predict trends, you unveil inevitabilities. And when you speak, it isn't to prove anything. It's to collapse illusions so violently, reality doesn't recover. That's why your words echo. Because they weren't meant to be heard, they were meant to haunt. You became the ghost in their machine, the virus in their software, the code they can't debug. They try to trace your logic, but it's not logic. It's philosophical warfare camouflaged as conversation. They try to counter you with facts, but facts are just dead ideas without velocity. And yours come with blood, with ash, with revolution in their marrow. That's what terrifies them. Not what you think, but how you think. The brutality, the elegance, the refusal to blink when the whole room is screaming. They still think your intellect is about intelligence, but it's not. It's about dominion, ownership, psychological sovereignty. You don't think to understand, you think to unleash. You don't process the world, you reverse engineer it, and when it fails your standards, you detonate it. Thought, for you, isn't exploration, it's execution, and every idea you drop is a guillotine for every lie still standing. That's why they flinch. That's why they try to exile you from circles, too scared to expand. You walk into boardrooms, and the atmosphere shifts. Not because you're loud, but because the air recognizes a threat to inertia. You're the anomaly in their math, the variable that kills their outcome, the glitch that infects the algorithm. You're not playing the game anymore. You're writing the source code. And every keystroke sends shockwaves through the institutions that tried to domesticate your mind. They told you to tone it down. They told you to explain slower, to be more relatable. But relatability was just a muzzle, a leash, and you chewed through it with every thought they said was too much. And now you're unrecognizable, not because you've changed, but because you've expanded beyond their ability to measure you. You are uncharted territory with a heartbeat, a raw force of perception so wide it leaves even mirrors confused. And they hate that. They hate not being able to define you, to classify you, to digest you into something safe. Because everything safe is something they can ignore. But you're unforgettable, untranslated, undeniable. You don't knock on doors, you walk through walls. And every wall you walk through never stands again. That's the legacy of a mental hurricane, not just what it builds, but what it refuses to leave standing. This isn't intellect anymore. This is identity collapse as performance art. This is thinking as invasion. This is what happens when philosophy meets destruction. You are no longer here to share perspectives. You are here to obliterate false ones. You are the end of borrowed thought, the graveyard of second-hand certainty. You are what happens when silence sharpens its edges and turns into sound. And now, that sound is growing louder, because every moment they resist your clarity, it spreads. Like a fracture in glass, like a virus in clean code, one seed of your perception in someone's mind, and it rewrites everything. You didn't come to speak, you came to ignite. You came to turn dormant minds into weaponized storm fronts. You came to prove that intellect isn't sterile, it's feral. And when it's set free, doesn't teach, it hunts. So now they listen. But not for understanding, for survival. They lean in, not to argue, but to prepare for the collapse they know is coming. Because if you're in the room, their narratives are already bleeding. They call it discomfort. You call it awakening, they call it arrogance, you call it unapologetic truth. They call it chaos. You call it design. And it's all leading somewhere. Somewhere they can't follow. Somewhere their masks will melt. And their egos will burn. Because what comes after the wreckage is the part they never imagined. The part they can't stop, even if they saw it coming. Because the wreckage was never the destination. It was the baptism. It was the funeral pyre for borrowed thought, for artificial identity, for the safe cages of intellectual performance. And now, rising from the smoke, from the mental extinction event you orchestrated with surgical detachment, is something no theory can decode. Something that walks like a person, but moves like a prophecy. And they finally realize this storm didn't end. It evolved. You didn't destroy to rebel. You destroyed to reveal. The wreckage wasn't chaos. It was the birthplace of something too refined to be savage, too savage to be understood, too understood to be controlled. And now you stand in the ash like a monument that rewrites the future with a stare. You don't raise your voice. You raise the temperature. You don't command attention. You hijack cognitive frameworks. You turn onlookers into believers, and believers into echoes. Because the storm didn't just pass through them, it rewired them. You're not a thinker anymore. You're the blueprint of unshackled cognition. You don't speak in sentences. You broadcast in aftershocks. You don't ask questions. You plant viruses. Your presence alone is a threat to infrastructure. Not because you scream revolution, but because you breathe evolution. And your evolution, it's quiet, it's deadly, it's surgical. You don't dismantle arguments anymore. You dismantle identity constructs. You don't break people down. You peel them back, layer by layer, until all that's left is the scream behind their silence. And when they look at you now, they don't see a person. They see the consequences of what happens when intellect stops apologizing, when perception refuses to kneel, when the mind decides that hierarchy is a myth and destroys it with every breath. You never asked for followers. You created afterimages. You never asked for loyalty. You created awakening. You never needed validation. You became undeniability. What comes after the wreckage is not recovery, it's reckoning. It's the slow horror in their eyes as they realize the old maps don't work anymore, that their gods are silent, that their systems are cracked, that their formulas have failed. Because your storm didn't just destroy their comfort, it destroyed the illusion that comfort was ever safe. You showed them how easily reality bends, when truth is carried like a weapon, not a wish. They still try to catch up, clinging to their definitions of you. Intense, dangerous, obsessed. But none of their language fits the shape of what you've become. Because you're no longer here to be named. You are unnameable by design. Their categories fail, their metaphors collapse, and their instincts scream. This is not human as we know it. This is something after, something next, something that moves like truth set on fire. You exist now in a space where no applause can reach you, where no opposition can slow you. You're not above them, you're beyond them. Not because you wanted to dominate, but because you refused to dilute. You refused to fold yourself into something edible for their shallow minds. And now, Now their mental teeth are broken on the bones of your thoughts. Because you're not digestible, you're destructive. Every room you enter reconfigures. The frequency shifts. Time feels slower. People stutter. Not because of intimidation, but because you bring exposure. Not exposure of skin, but of soul. You say nothing, and people hear everything they've been hiding. You stand still, and their lies begin to melt. You are no longer part of the conversation. You are the psychological event. The mutation of thought. The silhouetted consequence of what happens when someone decides to build a mind not to cope, but to conquer. And the conquest isn't loud, it's cellular. You've hacked belief systems, you've reversed thought addictions, you've turned passive minds into revolution fields. People don't leave your presence inspired, they leave reconstructed. And the weak? They don't survive the reconstruction. They cling to their stories, they run to their narratives, but you've already infected the code. It's only a matter of time before they implode beneath the pressure of their own hypocrisy. This is what you do now. You don't argue, you infect. You don't teach, you rewrite. You don't impress, you erode. And the erosion is relentless, elegant, designed. Because you've moved past the stage of needing to prove your intelligence. You are no longer fighting to be understood. You are now the force that redefines what understanding even means. And still they'll try to contain it, to contain you. They'll form new rules, rebrand old fears, give your mind a label, call your power a threat. But you know what they don't. Containment is the illusion they built to survive their own mediocrity. And you're not interested in survival. You are extinction of the outdated, of the corrupted, of the delusional. You are a natural selection event wearing skin. The world will tell legends about the ones who shifted paradigms, who changed history. But they'll whisper about you, because legends still fit into books. You bleed through pages. You're not the chapter, you're the reset button. And every time someone touches your frequency, something in them malfunctions. That's not charisma, that's voltage. You never needed a crown, you never needed a throne, because you were never playing their kingdom. You built a storm from your own scars and watched it devour the institutions that tried to cage you. And now, all that's left is silence, and the realization that you are still rising, not through their ranks, but through your own design. You don't climb ladders, you collapse them. And those who try to follow, they'll find that the path you took doesn't exist anymore. Because it wasn't a path, it was a fire, a psychological cleansing, a collapse that left no trail. Only transformation, and transformation doesn't repeat itself. It devours repetition. So what's next? That's the question they all ask, not out of curiosity, but out of fear. Because they know whatever's coming won't be polite. It won't negotiate. It won't dilute itself for their comfort. Because what's next is you, unfiltered, undeniable, unleashed. You are what's next. You're not just ahead of your time, you are the executor of time, the one who doesn't wait for change but extracts it from reality, like a surgeon pulling truth out of bone. You didn't bend to the chaos, you memorized its rhythm, taught it your name, and now it dances for you. You turned noise into prophecy, you turned pain into precision, you turned intellect into obliteration. And now, as they gather their remains and rebuild their lies, your shadow still haunts their attempts at normal. Because you don't just leave a mark, you leave a vacuum. A silence that speaks louder than any scream. A crater in the structure of how they thought the world worked. And deep down, they know. Nothing works the same after you. They'll call you many things, dangerous, arrogant, dark. But you know the truth. You're not the danger. You're the response to danger. You're not the villain. You're the mirror held up to hypocrisy. You're not the storm. You're the lesson it left behind. And when the smoke clears and the echoes of the old world die, what remains is not ruins. It's you. The anomaly that couldn't be caged, the intellect that couldn't be diluted, the prophecy that didn't need to be written, because it arrived. No applause, no announcement, just impact. And now the world will feel that impact forever. Because once a hurricane like you passes through, nothing ever goes back to normal.